So kia ora, we're just riffing a conversation, again just reflecting on some things that have come up in the conversations that we've had online with you guys and that we've had together. And one thing that we've been thinking of is that whole idea of cultural appropriation. Like when we've been talking about, and once again, here's wrong with the hands, understanding our own cultural construct and that of the other, how do these two things tie together to make a similarity in the middle, a bicultural space in the middle? But what happens if we go too far? How do we decide, where do we delineate appropriate biculturalism and cultural appropriation? You sort of any ideas about cultural appropriation, Eva?
Yeah, I think I can just speak from my experience of being Pākehā, New Zealand European, growing up in New Zealand, and how uncomfortable I've felt, and how I have not known where that line is, but then there's been a desire to learn and to grow and to be open, but to not really know how to do that appropriately, and also having got it wrong sometimes as well. I'm actually really grateful for Otago Polytechnic and the fact that it promotes tikanga and te reo, Māori concepts, that has allowed me to grow and get more comfortable in that. But there's a fear inside of me, of being in these spaces and getting it wrong, or not following the right rules, or not following protocol, and being embarrassed or looking like an idiot, but more importantly, disrespecting the spaces that I've been in.
And that's interesting because these spaces are always shifting, eh? When I do that, but there's always a shift in there. And I remember back when I was a young fella, that was a while ago now. But growing up in New Zealand for me, initially when I was young, Pākehā or non-Māori didn't want to engage with Māori. There was that clear separation between the two. And, we went through a stage in and I'll say 1970s and early 1980s when some non-Māori were saying, actually, this is New Zealand, this is a unique place, the culture that you have is unique to here. How do we understand each other as New Zealanders, and how do we come into that space? Which is, I think, what you're talking about, isn't it? How do we appropriately come into space?
Yeah.
Now, if you remember, back when we first met, and we did that mihi whakatau and that mihi stuff, and we suggested the use of landscape as a key point of identification. From an iwi Māori side, and if you've been watching the videos I put up, from that iwi Māori side, the way we use it is a connection to whakapapa. So we introduce ourselves using the concept of mountains, but a personification of those mountains from people that existed or events from a long, long time ago. So when we do that, we're saying that mountain, I'm related to it. Now, when non-Māori come into that space, they're like, can we use mountains? We go, no, because you haven't got the relationship with mountains. Now, that's tricky, eh? Because I know that you have got a deep relationship and personal connection with landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where sometimes the othering, that's where it feels like the othering of, being non-Māori, for example, and it's like, does that insinuate that Māori is better or the best, and then everybody else is other or a non on that? And for me, it took me a while. I think initially I was like, oh, I'm just New Zealand European, like whatever. Even though I was the dominant, right? What do you say? Ethnicity in New Zealand. I still didn't feel like I fit, which is so interesting when I'm meant to be the one that's the dominant skin color, Yeah. And I felt like I didn't have a culture. My family also married into a Māori family as well, and I was always like, oh, why is my cousin, get to have brown skin? And then I would see my friends around me and it's like, oh, they had such a deep connection, and I don't have any of this. I don't have a culture. I feel a bit lost in that. And so it took me a long time to get to the point where I'm like, actually, I'm a proud Pākehā. And that word for me was a bit of a reclaiming of that, of like, actually that does mean I have identity, And I do fit into a whole other group of people who identify as Pākehā, who have had the same experiences as me. And for a while, it's like I wanted to take on the practices from iwi Māori because I was trying to fill a hole of myself, of like trying to fit in my own identity, until I realized like, okay, well, I don't actually need to take on anybody else's practices. I just need to own mine and my cultural identity. And through that, I can still engage with the practices, but I'm coming from a different place. There was a time where I felt jealous, in all honesty, you know, and I think it's so interesting because, you know, iwi Māori being so suppressed and have often been not the dominant, yet in my mind, there was something about that I lacked.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it is that over time, as New Zealanders, iwi Māori have always had that connection to landscape, and other New Zealanders who are, you know, non-Māori New Zealanders have arrived in this place over generations and trying to work out what that cultural construct and what that cultural connect to this place is. And it is through landscape. But it's through landscape with a different understanding of connection to landscape.
Yeah.
With our landscape, the way we articulate it is I'm related to that mountain, I'm related to that river, that's my great-great-great-great-grandmother, you know, those sorts of conversations. From a non-Māori perspective, that's not how we introduce ourselves. In fact, I'd suggest that if we walked up the street and said to someone, my great-great-great-grandmother's a mountain, you know, that wouldn't really, the relationship wouldn't start off on a very good foot because I think you're slightly crazy. But, and that's because of, you know, cultural constructs and blah, 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 and you guys know all of this stuff. But my point is that there must be a way that non-Māori can use, in this case, landscape, as an identifier without actually claiming the culturally appropriate signifiers that go with that.
Yeah.
So instead of claiming my whakapapa and saying, oh yeah, that mountain's mine, I go, oh, is it, cuz? You know, because I'm related to that as well. So no, I'm not related to it. I just like it. It's a different story.
Yeah.
It's a different discourse. It's a different construct. But that meeting place in the middle, once again with this, that meeting place in the middle is the same. We just have to be very careful that you don't try and be me.
Yeah.
And I pulled that out very cautiously. I remember Emeritus Professor Kyla Russell said that once. She said, it's great that Pākehā, that non-Māori want to be alongside us, but they don't have to be us. And I think that's where we are in New Zealand right now. We're working out after 170, 180 years, not her personally, but after 180,
I'm looking pretty good, eh?
after 180 years, what it means to come together and articulate who we are in this place and be comfortable with our cultural constructs.
Yeah.
About where we meet in the middle without actually taking that extra step of being uncomfortable, and this is where I was going before. In the 70s, we started off with, well, yeah, you guys can have some of this stuff, and then we weren't comfortable with it. And pulling back, no, hold on a minute, let's rearrange, let's reaffirm this relationship, this connection. What is right and what is wrong? How does this work? How doesn't this work? And there's a lot of fluidity in that.
Yeah.
It's politically charged, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think just going back to introducing in relation to landscape, I think there was a time or a feeling where I was like, well, to be culturally responsible and respectful, then I need to kind of figure this stuff out. Like, I need to be able to, work out how I whakapapa back to the land, until I realized, like, oh, hang on a second, that's not even my role, that's not even my job. And actually, even when I'm saying it, it feels kind of like false and weird. So I think that's a good indicator of like, oh, if it feels weird to me, then I know that I'm not doing something that's in alignment with my own identity. And then you're right, then I can connect with landscape. And it's different how you connect with landscape. And then I think when I realized that, when I became comfortable with that, I was like, I'm not trying to be you. And I respect the spaces and the stories that you have, and come to a place where it's like, and I will never have those stories, and there was like some sadness in there, then I could then be happy with the stories that I do have.
Yep, and that's the trick, is that constant negotiation. And it goes right back to this stuff again. Know yourself, what makes your own cultural construct. Know the other, build that relationship, that so what, and then the now what, how do we actually work this stuff together? And there'll be times where either one of us will cross that gap and try to be the other. And then that's when we need to say, well, just taihoa, hold on a minute, how's this working? There's a wee bit of tension here and pulling back. So being conscious, being vitally aware of similarities and difference, but also of sensibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the greatest learning moments that I've had is when people have pulled me up on things that I've done wrong or that haven't been culturally appropriate, and I've gone back and reflected and gone, oh, cool. So I think there's no harm in getting it wrong, or trying to work out this space in the middle, and let's just have some compassion for each other. That's what I would hope for both parties until we do start to figure this out a little bit more.
It's like any relationship, isn't it?
Yeah. So I wonder if that answers the question of where is the line of cultural appropriation? What is okay to use and not use? And there's no simple answer, is what I'm hearing.
There's no simple answer, but be aware that there's a space that we can share comfortably together. But when we start crouching into those places where there's discomfort, or where we're told, actually, is this appropriate? Or sometimes when we feel it, just pull back a wee bit.
Yeah. Ask some questions.
Ask some questions and don't be afraid of the answers.
Yeah.